Hello everybody and welcome to my brief presentation on surplus enjoyment and Joker, Zizek and popular film. I've worked for a number of years in the Zizek Studies space, writing for the Zizek Studies Journal, and my story arc in that journal is Zizek and popular culture. It's what I'm known for. I don't do very much of the continental philosophy stuff. There's a colleague here, Deacon Matthew Sharp, who spends a lot of time working on the origin stories, right? Pop culture. Origin stories of Slavoj Zizek's works, the Schellings, the Hegels of this world, the Althusses. For me, it's always been about Zizek and pop culture. Slavoj Zizek, as a contemporary psychoanalyst and philosopher, has done considerable work in a whole range of pop cultural artifacts. There's a great psychoanalytic legacy for doing that, originating in the ways Hitchcock invoked Freudian and Lacanian terminology and logics in producing his films and television shows. You know, a lot of people talk about Hitchcock's films. They spend far less time talking about They spend far less time talking about Hitchcock's television program. I remember when I was quite young, it was still a thing, and my grandfather used to talk about it quite a lot. This is a preview of my submission to the International Journal of Zizek Studies, the premier journal, showcasing the work of Slavoj Zizek, one of the, arguably the most famous living philosopher in the world. He's enjoyed recent popularity, has he not, as part of his interactions with Jordan Peterson. But, you know, a dedicated community of Zizek scholars have been working on his stuff much longer than that. The paper is now actually published in the Zizek Studies Journal, issue 17, volume 17, issue 1. I think that's the way it goes. The current issue of the Zizek Studies Journal. This presentation will give you a brief introduction to Todd Phillips' movie Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix. It'll give you a brief introduction to the psychoanalytic theory around the concept of surplus enjoyment. And it will end with an analysis of the movie Joker in relation to Zizek's theory. This is a well-worn path, by me at the very least. But for Batman aficionados, some of which might be watching this at home, the Joker sits in a very unusual place. This current Joker, the 2019 film, 2019, it's already been 4 years, in relation to the other Jokers that we've seen. Heath Ledger's Joker gets a lot of notoriety, the sociopath, the guy with no good explanation for his scars on his face. He keeps changing that story, does he not? Zizek points out it's as though he's mocking the idea, the Heath Ledger Joker from Christopher Nolan's film, is that right? I think it's Christopher Nolan. He mocks the idea that there should be some traumatic backstory to the way he is. And Heath Ledger's Joker shows us that no, I'm just a bad guy. And that's part of the legacy of Joker in the books, in the comic books. This Joker is very different. This is a Joker with an explanation. This is a Joker that we can understand, that we can get to know, and we can even perhaps like, which is the great provocation of this film, the idea that we should maybe like this guy, this version of the Joker. And maybe we shouldn't like some of the traditional characters in the Batman story that we're trained to like, our childish cultural tropes around rich, greedy capitalists are the good guys, and the downtrodden, marginalized, mentally ill are the bad guys. It's something that the newest Batman film with Robert Pattinson asks to consider as well, but in a slightly different way. I won't cover that particular topic in today's presentation, but it is in the paper. So Todd Phillips introduces us to a very different imagining of Joker. Arthur Fleck, I want to spend just a few moments I want you all to consider the word Fleck. In the great tradition of other Zizekian analysis, when the movie They Live with John Nada, Spanish for nothing, Arthur Fleck, in German, Fleck means blot or stain. This is a great explanation of where Arthur sits in the social hierarchy of 1980s Gotham City. Interestingly, 1980s Gotham City, metaphor for Manhattan. Very similar timeline to American Psycho and another anti-hero named Patrick Bateman. Arthur is a social nothing in this world, an outcast. He lives with his mother. He can't form meaningful relationships. He suffers from laughing fits from a head injury sustained during childhood abuse. It's a real illness, a real injury called the pseudo-bulbar effect, where a traumatic brain injury causes the victim to laugh uncontrollably, and this is displayed in the film. Arthur is a victim, we know this very clearly, until he decides to do something about it. And this is the provocation. When is it okay to fight back, to bite back, to use violence in response to terrible injustice? The satire in the film comes from the merchant bankers, the three yuppie merchant bankers, again invoking Bret Easton Ellis's novel American Psycho. They're terrible. They're threatening to abuse and assault, a woman on the underground, Gotham Underground. Arthur intervenes, saves the woman, and in the process puts himself in harm's way. They start beating him up, he kills them. Many would say there's some sort of retributive justice in that. The media of Gotham displays the three young men as great people. Oh, young people cut down in their prime. We're not meant to feel sympathy for them. It's very carefully crafted by Todd Phillips, but we're meant to feel sympathy for Arthur. Indeed, Phillips encourages us as viewers to consider why a vigilante in a bat mask is acceptable, but one in a clown makeup, I should say, is not. I think some of the answer lies in this psychoanalytic concept of surplus enjoyment. Let's just spend a few minutes considering it. Surplus enjoyment is a concept widely used in Zizek's work, widely used in Lacanian psychoanalysis as well, but it has its origins in Marx for Lacan. It's based on Marxian surplus value and Freud's analysis of castration anxiety as our psychoanalytic metaphor for loss, a loss that can never be regained. Once Father symbolically removes our penis in the resolution of the Oedipal complex, it can never be regained, and we spend our whole lives trying to regain that feeling of power, that loss, that feeling of loss of power, as the castration metaphor goes. Taken together, it's used by Lacan in Lacanian psychoanalysis to signify the always present, difficult to define excess inherent in enjoyment. In this idea, enjoyment is never simply a positive entity giving us something beneficial to our world. Its existence is always in some kind of excess. We enjoy over and above the actual benefits we retain from any product, situation, circumstance, whatever. Its origins in Marxian surplus value should be quite clear at this point. Surplus value, for those who aren't very familiar with this Marxian concept, it's arguably his most important concept, his most well-known. No, that's well-known is the wrong way to say it. In the era of the Jordan Peterson Slavoj Zizek debate, well-known is really out the window. Surplus value, let me spend a few seconds. In the employment situation, in the factory worker situation that Marx was referring to, employers, capitalists, needed to pay workers at a certain level, and workers needed to produce above that level. That excess in production that the company pockets is surplus value. You need to pay workers enough so that they can go feed themselves, be entertained, sleep well, and come back to do another work day in which they produce more than they are paid. The excess, the surplus value, goes to the company. In the same way, in surplus enjoyment, we receive from this world, in the clothing we wear, the food and drink we consume, enough to survive. What we get above and beyond that is our surplus enjoyment. There are so many levels at which we can explain this. Far more time would be needed. It relates to the psychoanalytic concepts of jouissance, superego. But let's just stay in surplus enjoyment and look to Zizek's words. Page 6 of his most recent book, Surplus Enjoyment. It's called Surplus Enjoyment. A guide for the non-perplexed is the subtitle. Surplus enjoyment implies the paradox of a thing, which is always and is nothing but an excess with regard to itself. In its normal state, it is nothing. It brings us to Lacan's notion of object d'art, which is the little object of desire. As the surplus enjoyment, there is no basic enjoyment to which one adds the surplus enjoyment. Enjoyment itself, excuse me, is always a surplus, in excess. And the best illustration of this for Zizek, as any Zizek scholar will know, is his analysis of Coca-Cola. I think the security mechanism of the firewall is going to prevent me from playing this. It will. So let's just spend a moment with me explaining what Zizek says in this video. It's from The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, and it's Zizek walking through the desert, drinking from a bottle of Coke. The Coke is going warm in the desert, and Zizek points out, Coca-Cola, it's the real thing, it's the it. The marketing campaign literally captures this idea of surplus enjoyment. In itself, it's a sweet, sugary beverage that doesn't quench your thirst. You're thirsty again shortly thereafter. It's chock full of sugar, and I suppose there is some nutritional benefit from that. It often loses out in taste tests to other blind taste tests to other colas. Why do people drink Coke? We know why. It's because it embodies that excess. It is the real thing. It is the thing that goes over and beyond our basic level of receiving what we need to survive in this world. The last episode of Mad Men parodies this as well, when Don Draper is going on his spiritual retreats, not rocking up at the office, and he gets a little smile at the end of the series because he's thought of the most evil marketing campaign in history, Coca-Cola, the real thing. In itself, the sugary drink, it doesn't quench our thirst. And as Zizek points out, in the desert it turns warm. Just when we need water to survive, Coke doesn't do it. It's no longer it. It tastes bad. It goes flat. It's hot. It's turned into the excremental. It's turned into shit, which is always the consequence of our surplus enjoyment. Our enjoyment must always stay at a distance. We must never achieve it. Relates here to the psychoanalytic concept of fantasy. It must stay as the extra, the undefinable something that gives life meaning. It must remain to us as an absence. So in a weird way, and this is where I'll bring it back to analysis of Joker, we get enjoyment from the loss. We get enjoyment from the absence of the thing we want. Excuse me. And this relates to a number of other concepts. We're actually really skilled at understanding what I'm talking about here. A Gucci jumper will keep us warm. A Kmart one does as well. But for many people, they desire the Gucci jumper. A BMW gets us from point A to point B. So does a rust bucket car. So does a cycle, like a pedaling cycle. So does the bus. Let's turn some of these concepts to an analysis of Arthur Fleck and Joker. It is the absence of Arthur's father that makes his life function. When he resists the loss, when he focuses on what he has not had, he hasn't had the fatherly figure. His mother is almost destitute, going quite insane, as is Arthur. As long as he's searching for father figures and supports his mother and remains ashamed of his laughing fits, he's lost. But when he embraces his predicament, when he fully enjoys his loss and pain, he finds a power that he didn't know that he had. And his disability becomes a perverted kind of superpower, which he ultimately turns to the only other irrational thing one can do when faced with irrational situations. He turns vulgar, he turns violent. Call me Joker. Is a perfect explanation of this situation. There should be no surprise that men's rights groups, incel groups, and clown cell groups, which is a subset of incels, have embraced the character of Joker. Something that's meant to cause pain, something that's meant to be a bad thing, is embraced and becomes a collective superpower. Women won't have sexual relationships with me. Fine. I don't want women either. Let's break this world down. Let's burn the whole system down. No women and no men together means no children. etc., and the various grievances of incel groups come to the fore. Incel groups are shocking in a way, but if we really, for a second, ponder the situation incel men find themselves in, we should have sympathy, I think. And Jordan Peterson has made a similar claim in a recent media interview. If we abandon people, this is maybe where the world takes us. I hope that's not too controversial. I can imagine that being received as a very controversial idea. I don't think it is. We can always reclaim our identities. We don't have to be victims unless we choose to be. You know what really makes me laugh, says Arthur Fleck in Joker. I used to think that my life was a tragedy, but now I realise it's a fucking comedy. His laughing fits, as he says to his mum before he kills her, they are the real me. Thank you very much for your time.